Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's launch webinar for the brand new UK Customs Academy, the world's first customs academy offering a comprehensive development pathway for customs professionals. My name is William Barnes-Graham, and I will be your host for today. Next, please. We have four great speakers today. Leslie Batchelor is the Director General of the Institute of Export and International Trade, and will be introducing the reasons behind the setting up of the Academy. David Riddleson from KGH Customs and the Centre for Customs and Excise Studies will be talking through the qualifications being offered by the Academy, and then drawing on their vast experience in the industry to explain why professional skills in the industry really do matter. We'll have Steve Cock from KGH again, and George Baker from George Baker Shipping. Next, please. Following these presentations, we will be running a short Q&A, and you can ask questions at any point during the session using the control panel to the right-hand side of your screen, as indicated in the screenshot on the slide here. Next, please. But to kick things off, over to you, Leslie.
Sorry. Thank you, William. Very nice to be here with you all, and very excited about being able to talk about this Customs Academy, which is something that we've been thinking about for a very long time. Have the next slide, please. So the UK Customs Academy has been developed at the request of HMRC. I mean, obviously, the Institute's been working with them for quite some time in the form of our Customs Diploma, which is has been around since 2013. And this has been developed to support the development of robust and sustainable customs intermediaries. That's everyone who's part of this process of developing customs procedures, documentations on behalf of exporters. And obviously HMRC have been investing very heavily in the quality training and learning and upskilling of people to make sure that they're going to be able to take advantage of all the opportunities that are coming forward. And we're very pleased to be working with KGH Customs Services in the UK in this collaboration, and obviously working through with HMRC. We also are very proud to be working with the Australians and the Centre for Customs and Excise Studies. Next slide, please. So what the idea is that we have a resource for customs professionals, and by resource we mean obviously that there'll be training and education, but also a bank of advice and information that they can have so they can see the best practice in international trade in terms of customs practice. It's not just exporting, it's importing. It's about making sure that they understand how customs controls work and how sanctions work. These are big issues around the whole of the trading cycle, and we're very proud to be producing qualifications and courses that provide practical suggestions and routes for new entrants to the sector, and also keep the professionals within the sector up to date with what's happening. Next slide, please. So, because we know that customs is a constantly changing environment, everybody finds it difficult to stay on top of this. And, you know, one of the things we have to think about are, you know, how we keep everyone in touch with WTO trade facilitation agreements and the changes within that, how we work with the World Trade Customs Office organisation within the safe framework for global trade, and of course this whole organisation around authorised economic operator status, which we will talk about in a little bit more detail later, I'm sure. What's really important is people understand how the customs declaration system actually works, and of course the technology around and other innovations that support it, and then that dreadful word Brexit and the impact that that's going to have on businesses, and how we can help businesses to stay ahead of that and hopefully undamaged by any changes that happen to the documentation or processes that are around. Next slide, please. So, you know, we know that customs professionals tend to learn on the job. You know, we have a famous expression where we say, you know, you wouldn't give a court case to a lawyer who wasn't fully qualified, and you wouldn't go to an accountant who wasn't fully trained, and yet we just send our goods all over the world without really much application as to who's looking after them and what the ramifications are. Once your part of the process has been finished, we tend to just accept that that's done and hope that everybody else is going to be doing the right things. So customs affects several parts of your business, and it's really, really important to make sure you're getting it right. In fact, the costs of not getting it right do include fines and, most importantly, delay at ports or the place of landing, and importantly, the reputational damage that it does with your customer when they're disappointed that they're receiving their goods either damaged or not on time. Actually, they're having to get more involved with the process than they thought they were going to get involved with. And the impact of getting it right, having smooth operations, actually saving money and making sure it gives everybody a competitive advantage. Next slide, please. So the site's already alive, and perhaps some of you have already looked at it. We're going to be actually launching it officially. We're going to have several important people coming along from the government to talk about it and HMRC on the 18th of September. We may have some spaces clear if anybody wants to come along and see that. That will be in London at the House of Commons. And obviously there's going to be a lot more information coming through as the final qualifications come through, and we actually have more information about the job board that's going on there and how the membership will be supported and works. It's a new adventure, and we're very pleased that it's beginning to really take shape. Hopefully you'll agree with us. Next slide, please. So how do you get involved? We've quoted the websites here. I'm sure it was on the email that you received, but if you really want any information about it, do call us, do talk to us about it, because we're really keen to make sure everyone can take advantage of this as quickly and as efficiently as possible. Do not be afraid to ring us. I promise we'd love to hear from you. Next slide, please. So just a very, very quick overview. Excuse me. We have our level 2 qualification, which is the entry level qualification, which is a certificate of customs practice and procedures, and that's been up and running now for a little while. If anyone's been doing that with us, please talk to us about how they can actually get the qualification endorsed. Next slide, please. The next one is the level 3. I know that David Widdowson will be speaking, in fact, after me, and I'm actually wondering whether these are David's slides that we're looking at now. David, is this yours?
It certainly is, Leslie. You're stealing all my thunder.
Well, it didn't have your name. I'm so sorry. Ian, can you please go back to level 2? Thanks very much. And I'm going to hand over to David Widdowson, who is Professor David Widdowson from the Charles Sturt University, and who is in charge of all of the education programs that we're working with. David.
Great. Thanks very much, Leslie. I thought I'd start off by just saying that the aim of our institute in Australia has always been to raise the academic standing of the customs profession. And that's a very important issue around the world. And the interesting thing about customs education and training is that whilst aspects change from country to country, from region to region, the underlying principles are all the same. So we're very pleased to be working with HMRC and KGH and the Institute of Export and International Trade on this important venture. Now, in terms of the levels, I'm going to run through very briefly the various level qualifications that we have on offer through the Academy. One thing to bear in mind is that the qualifications themselves are all designed to be in an articulated set. So in other words, the level 2 naturally flows to the level 3, level 4, level 5, and on through the bachelor's and postgraduate programs. We've done this importantly so that it provides, actually for the first time in the world, a continuous learning path from the very basic through to the higher levels. And I should say that if anybody is interested at the end of all of this to continue on to their PhD, then that's also an opportunity as well. The level 2 qualification is the entry-level qualification. It is being built to expand on the earlier module that was developed with HMRC, and it gives a very good introduction to trade and customs and the various processes and procedures, introduces people to the concept of calculating import duty and lodging customs declarations, etc. So it's actually a 40-hour course, and it provides a very good understanding and overview of the industry to those who haven't had previous experience in the industry, and we do come across these people quite often. What do I do to get into this industry? What are the basic principles and practices that I need to understand? And this is designed to do that. So if we can have the next slide, please. Right, so then we move to the level 3 qualification. Now, the certificate in customs compliance is essentially designed to get people up and running in the customs profession in terms of having the ability to prepare and to lodge customs declarations, but not only that, to understand what's actually behind the workings of all of this. Why do they fill in this particular field in a particular way? And this leads to the award of Associate Customs Practitioner that will be recognised by the Academy. And it's important to know that this is what we believe is the basic qualification for anyone who is going to be involved in the customs industry, either working with a trader, undertaking their own customs activities, or working for a brokerage or other service provider. What this covers is, this gives a very good introduction to customs law and regulation. We use an innovative online tool called the UCC Navigator, which some of you may have come across, but it really helps to understand the legislation. When you look at the legislation that we use currently here in the UK, which is the EU legislation, we have the Union Customs Code, but then there's also the Delegated Act, Transitional Delegated Act, the Implementing Act, and they all need to be read in conjunction with each other to understand what the implications of the various requirements are. Well, the UCC Navigator is an online tool which is supplied with all of our courses from level 3 upwards, which enables you to quickly go from one article to another and to actually see what the linkages are between the various articles. It's a terrific tool, and we hope that you will agree with us when you enroll in the courses. We then go through the various customs processes and procedures, so from entry to release for free circulation, then into the special procedures, transit, storage, processing, specific use, etc., into export. We look at the basics of duty calculation, what's behind all of that in terms of tariff classification, the rules of origin, and the valuation of goods for customs purposes, and finally move on to customs declarations. Now, again, in terms of the customs declarations module, we've put a lot of emphasis into the practical application, because a lot of people can read what you have to do and say, okay, box X, this is what I need to fill in there. This is an online tool which allows you to fill in the various boxes, and it'll tell you whether you've got the information correct or incorrect in relation to the various scenarios that we discuss throughout the course. So it's a very practical approach to the completion of customs declarations. Next slide, please. The level 4 is building on level 3. So level 4 covers everything that I've discussed in relation to level 3, but there's 3 more important units that we need to cover in order to become what we in the Academy will recognise as certified customs practitioners. Now, those 3 subjects are the AEO requirements, so understanding that in some detail, and we go back to the World Customs Organization's safe framework of standards to understand where this is all coming from. We look at it in the context of what's happening here in the UK, but more importantly, the benefits of an AEO generally come into play when an exporter is sending their goods to a country where perhaps the customs practices aren't as advanced as they are here. So the mutual recognition agreements come into play there, and we cover off on those issues as well. We also look at excise duties and all that's associated with that, and also export licensing controls. For those of you who are in the industry, you'll understand the particular importance of those particular modules. So next slide, please. Then we come to the level 5 qualification, and we see this as the capstone in terms of the practical application of customs knowledge. And so this is recognised by the Academy as an accredited customs professional if you gain this particular level, and it builds on what has already been discussed, but it looks at it at a higher level in terms of what's happening internationally, where that links into international customs law. Goes into more depth in terms of the EU customs law and the impact at the higher level that this is having in relation to UK. I should say at this stage, because I know it's going to come up as a question, that a lot of the module content is based on what is currently in place for the UK, and as we know that UK is currently relying on EU customs law. As things change, as and when and if, perhaps somebody in the UK could tell me, I watch your television with great interest, but if things were to change, and when they change, what we will be doing is tracking that and including any amendments into the course materials, right through from level 2 through to the master's program. And where new sets of legislation arise, we'll be substituting those for the existing ones. So what's in place now in terms of EU customs law won't change in relation to what will then be importing and exporting to or from those other 27 member states. But what is likely to change, of course, is what happens in terms of the legislation here at the UK, and that's what we'll be monitoring very closely and making sure that all our members and learners are kept up to date as that progresses. The final element of the level 5, we look into research methods, and the participants undertake a research topic of their choice to top that off. So if you can have the next slide, please. So mentioned before, all of these qualifications articulate into the university awards which are delivered by the Centre for Customs and Excise Studies at Charles Sturt University. Again, all of these are delivered online, so they're all available. You don't have to you might want a trip to Australia, but you don't have to go there. You can do this all online. The first of these qualifications that they articulate into is the Bachelor of Border Management, which is like any other bachelor program. It's actually a 3-year bachelor program, and it's very comprehensive in its coverage of all things relating to the border and international trade. Perhaps the next slide, please. And the other qualifications which this suite of courses articulate into is our Master of Customs Administration suite. So we have the Graduate Certificate, the Graduate Diploma, and the Master of Customs Administration. And basically what you see here is the three steps. So a Graduate Certificate represents 1/3 of a Master's. The Graduate Diploma is the next step, so that represents 2/3 of the Masters, and then there is the final Masters there. The certificate that you see, what you saw on the previous slide, and also top right-hand corner of this slide, is the recognition by the World Customs Organization that these particular qualifications meet the requirements of the customs profession. So there's not many of these certificates issued. I think there's about 20 at the moment around the world, and some 7 of those are held by the Centre for Customs and Excise Studies. So what you need to realise is that the learning pathway that we're providing through the Academy actually all forms part of WCO, World Customs Organization, accredited qualifications, because they all articulate through to the top level. So the final slide, please. So this just gives you an overview of where we're at in terms of providing the qualifications. The Level 2 certificate is available already. The backbone, as I said, of practical customs application, the Level 3 certificate in customs compliance. We're looking to release that next week. Mid-September has come up very quickly, but that should be available on the website next week. By the end of October, we'll have the Level 4. End of November, we'll have the Level 5. In terms of the university qualifications, the bachelor's degree, grad certificate, grad diploma, and the master's, they're all available now. But I should say that they are studied on a semester basis, which starts in February next year. The next semester starts in February next year. So they are all now available. So by the end of November, the UK Customs Academy will have the complete suite of qualifications available to you. Thank you for that. Thank you for listening. I'll hand over to Steve Cock, who's from KGH Customs Services in the UK.
Hello, everyone. Can I ask for my first slide? So what I'm going to talk about more is what the actual world of customs can be like to live and work in. For some of the people listening, that will already be their role, but for others, they'll be new to it. My time in working for customs has taken me through a number of roles and all over the world, and at every point I found it an enjoyable and interesting job. I've been a customs officer, I've worked for one of the big accountancy firms, I've been an owner-operator of a company, and most recently I now work for the biggest customs services provider in Europe. And at every step of the way, I have found different challenges in the role that I do. I know a lot about customs, but there's a heck of a lot more that I don't know. And so even though I've been doing it for 25 plus years, there's always something new to consider. And that really brings us to Brexit, because in a world that changes anyway and is very diverse, the impact of Brexit is going to make a huge difference on the day-to-day work that I do and that other people in the field do, but also it means that there is a huge gulf in the amount of people who are out there that can actually do this work. And that comes with great opportunity for people who want to take it. So in very broad terms, I mean, no doubt you've all come across this anyway, but in broad terms, if we leave the European Union, all of a sudden there will be borders between the UK and the rest of the EU. And what that means is a great deal of formality in terms of getting goods in and out of the country. And it means a large number of people need to be trained up to actually do it. At the moment, as a general indication, in terms of imports and exports from the UK to the rest of the world outside of the European Union, there are 55 million movements of goods in and out, so declarations that are required per year. That's going to jump potentially overnight to 200+ million. So we're going up by fourfold. And a lot of the declarations that are made at the moment, they're done electronically. Companies have been doing it for a while. They have their systems plumbed into the systems of their border agents. And so the data flows and declarations are made. Well, when we jump to the 200 million, sure, that's going to happen for a part of that trade, but that's going to take time. So we're going to go to a situation where the demand is going to be huge, but the capacity within the industry is ill-equipped at the moment to take it on. So there will be measures to try and reduce the impact of that at the outset. For a start, we know on the Irish border that UK customs are going to require no checks, no formalities. Goods will just enter. And on the borders with continental Europe through the Channel Tunnel, pretty much the same. There won't be a great deal of control, but over time those controls will come in. Companies will need to register to something called a trusted trader program so that customs know that they're good citizens, that they can take care of their own tax affairs and report those to customs. But all of this will require staff who know what they're doing to undertake these roles. Next slide, please. And so what are the roles? If you go back a number of years, historically, most medium to large companies would have had an internal customs specialist. It may well have been somebody within the logistics team that probably still exists in those companies, but there would have been somebody who knew how to interact with customs, and that has declined simply because we've done most of our trade with the European Union, and there have been no formalities at the border. So that shortfall, if we are to leave the European Union, needs to be reversed. There's also the case that the number of customs officials has declined as well. When I was a customs officer, there were lots like me who went around companies within the UK checking their records to make sure that they had done the right thing. Well, if there's no customs duty to pay because we're in part of the European Union and there are no formalities, there's less to check. So at the moment, customs are bringing on a large number of staff themselves. And the same is being mirrored across the water in the Netherlands and France, Germany. They're all taking on additional customs staff because there are additional checks that need to be made. So George Baker's going to come on to this later and talk about the brokerage industry. But as I understand it, the brokerage industry needs to increase potentially by as many as 10,000 people to take care of all of the additional import and export declarations that are going to be required. As I've mentioned before, most large companies used to have an in-house specialist. Well, that role is going to come back. And so those who understand the customs world will be at quite an advantage. I mean, we have a difficulty potentially retaining our own staff because all of a sudden the demand that there was for their role has just jumped exponentially. So you will need duty consultants, people like myself. If you needed a customs warehouse, something again that hasn't been required really for a long time because goods are within the European Union, there hasn't been a need to store them duty-free for any reason, because if they're here, they can travel to France or Germany without any formalities. Well, that's changing. So you need consultants to set up customs warehouses, duty relief schemes. And then finally, as I've said, customs officers. Customs are recruiting. They will train their own staff, but at the moment we're talking to customs about how they should be trained. Next slide, please. And so what are the possibilities? Being an expert in customs matters means that you can do all sorts of different things, and there are jobs pretty much to suit anyone. There are broker roles where you are working generally in the same building doing customs declarations on a regular basis, but there are all sorts of other roles around particularly what I do. So for example, a company may want us to come in and audit them to make sure that not only are they accounting for their tax in the right way, but that they're doing it in the most cost-effective way. And so we'll look to audit companies. It may be that a company disagrees with a ruling that they've had from customs about the classification of their goods and how much tax they might have to pay, and they'll go to court. And so I, for example, do quite a lot of legal work. I represent clients within the what's called the first tier tribunal, that's the lowest court in tax matters, and the upper tribunal, which is the equivalent of the High Court. I'm not a barrister, but I can represent my clients and do so fairly regularly. There are other roles to do with things like tariff classification. Every item that you can import has a 10-digit code, and that sets the tax rate. But there are all sorts of factors that can affect what the right classification should be. And so we, from time to time, employ, for instance, a professor of physics from Oxford University to help us classify goods. It's a niche area and a very interesting one for people who enjoy it, and that would include me. Then you get things like export control. That's a very big sector, making sure that technology goods that have potential dual military use or things like works of art being exported, that they would have to be licensed before that they can leave the European Union, or in the future leave the UK. And then there are all sorts of other roles: customs warehousing, supply chain analysis, other taxes. David's already mentioned excise duty, but our world also covers things like air passenger duty and landfill tax, all sorts of different things that if it's the kind of thing you're interested in, you can get involved in. And there are lots of possibilities in terms of what the subject matter is, but also lots of possibilities in where it can take you. I've lived and worked in the United States for a while. David mentioned earlier that the rules tend to be the same on a basic level around the world. Tariff classification, if you can do it here, you can do it in the United States, you can do it in Japan. And so a lot of the work that I do is not based in the UK, it's based all over the European Union and outside of it. So there are a range of possibilities and a range of where it can take you to. Next slide, please. So coming to the actual need for the academy, when I was a customs officer, basically you got allocated to a senior officer and they showed you the ropes. There was no formal training. That is changing within customs, and it's long overdue. So customs never trained its people adequately. They had no qualification structure. That's not the case in VAT or corporate tax within customs, but it was always the case in customs. So customs are requiring that companies are able to demonstrate that they know what they're doing. I've mentioned earlier that there's this trusted trader program that's going to come in. So companies will have to demonstrate that they know how to account for tax, but they will also have to demonstrate that their people are qualified to actually undertake their roles within the customs world. And without that ability to demonstrate your competence, the company that you work for won't necessarily be able to gain the approvals and permits that it requires to do whatever it wants to. So if you want a customs warehouse, for instance, somebody's got to know how a customs warehouse works, but also demonstrate that they know. And how do they do that? Through a qualification. There's also the very clear fact that if you're educated, the chance of you making mistakes reduces. As Leslie mentioned earlier, I think, the customs world used to be one that if you made a mistake, customs would come along and say, well, you owe us some duty and some interest, but there we are, we'll let matters rest there. Increasingly, customs now come at companies for penalties, and their starting point generally now is 100% of the tax that's been underpaid. And so the ability of a company to demonstrate that its people know what they're doing also has the knock-on benefit that they're less likely to make mistakes. And if customs find that they have made mistakes, the fact that they have educated staff is a means of mitigating any penalty that you might have. Also, it means that employees are protected. If you know what you're doing and you don't make mistakes, then of course customs are less likely to look to penalise people. When I was working in customs, part of the reason I left was the number of interviews under caution that I was having to take part in, as people within companies who were uninformed were doing things that they're just being told to do by their bosses. Things like making certificate of origin declarations, not knowing what they were and not knowing the ramifications. So for that reason, I would say anybody out there who has a role like that should ensure that they know what they're doing. And then finally, we come to AEO trusted trader programs. People need to be qualified not only to administer them within companies, but there are people who help companies set up for those. And so you can become qualified in how to do that. Next slide, please. So personal benefits, what's in it for me? Obviously, if you become qualified in something, there is the job satisfaction in knowing that you're doing a good job, and that if somebody is looking over your shoulder, they're not going to find you wanting in any way. So you have reassurance in your own ability to get things done. There's also the fact that there's the professional recognition of those around you. If you go to a conference or you meet colleagues who are in the same world as you and that they know you're qualified, well, of course, that recognition doesn't hurt. There's also the financial reward. The customs world, I have found, is a very good one to work in. If you work for some of the larger accountancy firms, the salaries can be very, very good. But of course, the more qualified you are, the more you can look to drive the price for your time, the reward that you get. And as I said earlier, these skills are in demand. They always have been, but they're becoming more so. And Brexit is a driving force behind that. So if you were qualified as a broker at the moment, I can tell you now there aren't enough people out there. You can not exactly write your own salary demand, but you can push it up if you are qualified. And then there's the fact that whatever you learn in doing this, it's a transferable skill. So you can locate outside the UK if that's what you want for a time, and it doesn't just have to be within the European Union. You can, the world becomes your oyster. You can look further afield. So that's my part. I'm going to hand over now to George Baker, who I said is going to give the angle from the broker side of things. Over to you, George.
Thanks, Steve. Hi, everyone, and good morning. Next slide, please. Okay, so in my opinion, it would be an excellent idea for you to consider getting involved in my particular line of business, and that's customs brokerage, UK customs brokerage. It's an engaging career, exceptionally good long-term prospects, and especially for ambitious young people. There are so many examples of individuals who have started from school at a clerical level and who have gone on to reach senior management positions, or who have even established and run their own businesses. I mean, it can be done. I mean, I progressed from a trainee clerk, general manager, and then through to owning my own business, which is, I'm proud to say, acknowledged as one of the largest independent customs brokerages in the UK. But I'm not one in a million. This is a common progression that's happened. I have a friend of mine who I shall be meeting later on today, who has run a similar business to myself, a customs brokerage business. He's recently retired and sold the business. He was in the same class as me at school. We're all friends, and we managed to maintain our friendship whilst being competitors for many years. So it's been a good career choice for me, and of course I recommend it to you. Next slide, please. So what do customs brokers do? We've covered some of this already, but I shall, put it in my own perspective. We are intermediaries. Okay, customs brokers are professionals who specialize in customs rules and regulations, sometimes referred to as customs agents or customs clearance agents. They submit electronically declarations to customs, complex declarations to customs, and can make the appropriate duty and VAT payments to customs on behalf of their clients. I mean, the concept of it, if you put it very simply, is a bit like you might need a tax accountant to help you with your complex income tax return and make sure that you pay the correct amount of tax, not too much, not too little, just the correct amount. And in the same way, in a similar way, if you're an importer and you bring goods into the UK, you might need a customs broker to help you with the complex customs documentation and make sure that you pay the correct rate of duty, not too much duty, not less than you should, absolutely the correct amount. A customs broker has a customer base that's mainly comprised of UK importers and UK exporters who are trading with countries outside the EU. And of course, I mean, these are companies who don't already have an internal customs specialist. Some of them do. Steve mentioned this. Customs brokers have a vital role in keeping the supply chain moving through the ports and airports. That's a really important point to make. The ports and airports become very quickly congested if the cargo is not customs cleared and moved very quickly. The job involves an awful lot more than just filling in forms and making customs declarations electronically. The customs processing at the sharp end where we are has become fast-paced, highly automatic. Problems have to be solved under time pressure. No 2 days are the same in this job, and it's not necessarily a 9 till 5 operation. Think about perishables arriving as air freight or trucks arriving on roll-off ferries into ferry ports. It's a 24/7 activity. It's not a 9 to 5 thing. Shift work may be involved. Next slide, please. So a little bit about who the customs brokers are and the career opportunities. Customs brokers can be private individuals, partnerships, large companies, small companies, all sorts of different organizations. Most say that they are facing skill shortages right now. Most of them are recruiting right now. Steve mentioned about the Brexit impact, which I shall also speak about in a moment or two. If you apply for a job within our sector, you're assured of an interesting career, and your chance of a successful job application is, in my personal opinion, much greater than it might be when you look at other alternatives. Remember that the big name organizations in more prominent industries get tens of thousands of job applications. but they have to limit their intake of people. As I say, customs brokers in the main are facing skill shortages, and they're recruiting. Customs brokers carry a huge responsibility in making declarations to customs. It's been mentioned already that fines can apply to incorrect declarations. Due to the complexity of the work, operational clerks require extensive formal training, but once qualified, and ideally with 2 years on the job experience, I mean, your services are certain to be wanted. I must emphasize that, your skills will be in demand. Next slide, please. The future for customs brokers is bright. Brexit will have a tremendous impact on our industry. Looking at some facts and figures again, there's about 10,500 trucks pass through the port of Dover every day, and a further 6,000 use the Channel Tunnel. Right now, only 5% of these trucks need customs declarations and customs clearance. They're the small minority carrying the trade between the UK and the countries outside of the EU. And the overwhelming 95% majority of the traffic originates in the EU or shipping to the EU. And this EU traffic has not needed customs documentation or clearance since 1993, when the borders back then were removed. So imagine the huge challenge for customs brokers on day one of Brexit if 100% of trucks through Dover suddenly need customs declarations again. Brexit, if and when it happens, is going to have a tremendous impact on our industry. Regardless of the effects of Brexit though, which is the uncertain area, there is a most positive future for the customs broker anyway. In an increasingly globalized market, there'll always be fast-growing international trade. Freight movements will increase as products from all over the planet, I should say, go from A to B. Customs procedures at borders are certain to apply, and customs brokers will expect to be kept very busy indeed. Next slide, please. Finally, the wider logistics industry is an interesting prospect as a career. It's important to mention that a step into customs brokerage work could ultimately become a step into the wider logistics industry. The logistics and freight forwarding industry in general is worth considering when searching for a stimulating career. Many activities within the industry are closely linked to customs work. In fact, many large freight forwarding companies do have their own internal customs departments, and they again will be recruiting customs clerks at the present time. Our group has diversified into international transport. We've been customs brokers over some 37 years, but we've diversified. We do international transport, UK container haulage, customs controlled warehousing, ocean freight, and cargo handling. All these activities in a customs related sense we are now handling internally. But it's interesting to note that many of our senior managers who have progressed within our organization and who specialized in these individual areas began their careers in customs departments. A fundamental understanding of customs processing is still vitally important to their daily work. whatever you decide to do, I wish you well. I wish you all the best for your future career, and you can be sure that success will come your way through hard work and dedication, whether or not you progress into the customs brokerage world that I've enjoyed a career in. Thank you for listening.
Great, thank you, George, and thank you also to Steve, David, and Leslie for giving a great overview of the Academy and also talking about the importance of professional skills in customs world. We're now going to open the floor to some questions. Just a reminder that you can ask questions at any point using the control panel on your screen as indicated on the slide here. First question I'm going to put to David. We've had a couple of people ask about what kind of level of experience counts towards different certification or qualifications. So Ian, for instance, asks, could you start a level 3, for instance, without having to study level 2? And Jim, from a much more senior positions, he's been working in a role for 13 years, and he's asked what level he should consider to start at with his current experience. So David, can you give a bit of an overview in terms of experience and the levels?
And it's a fair question. We come across people who have vast years of experience who are looking to embark on a particular qualification. If you've been involved in the industry and you have a good understanding of the basics, then there's no need to do, for example, level 2. You could jump in to level 3. Another thing to think about is that those who've had considerable experience in the industry might even want to look at entering at a higher level. In the educational world, there's this wonderful thing called recognition of prior learning. And the prior learning that we consider is not only the formal qualifications which have been gained through study, but also on the job work experience as well. And there's a process, of course, of demonstrating that you have certain skills and knowledge and experience. And then based on that, we can introduce you to a higher level qualification. Something that we find quite a bit is, interestingly, is those, and this was one of the questions that came up as well, those with a level 5 qualification who have already done that through the institute. They're saying, well, what are the opportunities to advance from there if we don't have a bachelor's degree? It is possible through the recognition of prior learning. We do actually recognise the level 5 as a starting point for the graduate certificate in customs administration. So there are a range of ways that you can sort of jump into the qualification onto the qualification ladder at different points.
And Leslie, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'm just really to reinforce what David's saying, and that the reason that the KGH, Charleston, and the Institute are working together, because the Institute in the UK is an off-qual awarding organisation, and that means that we have a process for what we call here in this country applied prior learning, which means that we can actually look at your job role and we can look at some of the work that you've done and actually set you at a certain level. So you might be able to join at level 5 very easily if you've got no other qualifications in there. It would be about just spending a little bit of time with you, understanding what your job role is and what you've been doing, because we accept totally that this industry, you know, the whole industry of international trade is very much based on the fact that we've all been thrown into it head first. We didn't leave school thinking we were going to be in international trade. We've sort of fallen into these roles, and what I really want to do is make sure you understand that there's a place for you somewhere, and it's only a question of talking about how what level of job you're doing, and we can pitch you at the right qualification very easily.
Great, thank you, Leslie. And we've had a few questions coming through about how long these courses take. David, do you want to just give an overview about how long the courses take?
Yeah, sure. Just a very quick snapshot. So the level 2, it takes about 40 hours to complete. And what I'll say now is that it depends on your prior experience. With some people who don't have any previous experience, it will take the full 40 hours. Others may be able to do it in a much shorter time. Level 3, we move to 160 hours, which is generally completed in 6 months to 1 year. The level 4, total of 250 hours, and again, somebody who's doing this on a part-time basis would generally take around 9 months. A little bit longer for others. Level 5, generally we say if you're doing it on a part-time basis, then give yourself a year and a half to 2 years. And as far as the higher level qualifications are concerned, the equation there is basically 3 years for the bachelor's and a year and a half for the master's. Something else that, while I've just got the mic very briefly, is that thanks to Her Majesty's Government, there have been a range of grants announced which allow potential learners to obtain up to £2,250 per course in relation to the grants, and this information is also on the website.
Great, thank you, David, and thank you for mentioning the grants as well. We have some more information on the Customs Academy website about those. We've had a few questions about AEO status, one of which came from Michael, and asked, can a company with AEO status take a lot of the sting out of a Brexit situation? And a few people have asked about how the courses facilitate getting AEO status as well. So I'm going to put that to George first on a general level to talk about AEO, and then we'll introduce David to talk about how the courses help people to get it. So George first.
Okay, yeah, AEO is a quality mark, and customs in each EU country operate under a framework called the UCC, the Union Customs Code, and rules and procedures are standardized to be the same in each country. The idea is that everyone operates under the same code, everyone tries to achieve the same level of, shall we say, electronic submission of documents. There's mutual recognition. So AEO is granted by one member state and then recognized by all the other member states. And although there are similar accreditations worldwide, AEO is an EU thing. But we're leaving the EU, and it seems that it's not certain at this stage how we will align ourselves with the EU. You could almost argue that if we leave the EU, then AEO is not relevant. I would like to think, as someone who believes strongly in AEO, that, and I should say that AEO was introduced in 2009, and so our company 10 years ago was one of the first companies to achieve this excellent accreditation. I would hope, and all I can say is hope, that AEO will be recognised and will ease the movement of goods post-Brexit, and will give the possibility for importers and exporters to experience less customs examinations and quicken the movement of their goods across borders. But I can't say so with any certainty. As I say, it's an EU thing, and we're leaving the EU.
Great, thank you, George. And David, do you want to add anything about how the qualifications cover AEO?
Just very briefly in terms of the time, but one of the criteria for obtaining AEO status across the EU, including the UK, is customs competency, demonstrating your customs competency. And what we've done is ensure that all the courses are fully compliant with the EU AEO competency requirements. And in fact, some of the member states have already recognised our training for AEO purposes. So we propose that that will be the same in the UK once the suite of courses is finalised.
Great, thank you, David. And on that note, we are, as David alluded to, starting to run out of time. So thank you once again to George, David, Steve, and Leslie for your answers and presentations. It's a really great initiative at a critical time for UK businesses. So I hope everyone's found that useful. Next slide, please. So, yeah, on the final slide, you will now see a reminder of where you can find all the information about the Customs Academy. The URL for it is ukcustomsacademy.co.uk. And you can field general queries about the project to info@ukcustomsacademy.co.uk, and also ask for support on issues pertaining to the qualifications and offer as well at help@ukcustomsacademy.co.uk. If you didn't get to your questions today in the webinar, we will try to get back to you on email afterwards. But we hope you found today's webinar very useful, and we look forward to talking to you again soon. But for now, goodbye.